is Bailey Jasper, and this is my presentation on my final project. For the history of nursing, my topic is on hospice, palliative care, and the American perception of death and dying. In this project, I really tried to show the progression and the scary, cloudy mindset that some people have about death. In this side, I have hospice reaching out with options, palliative care reaching out with options, just having more education and showing people that there is life and death does not always have to be a scary, painful, and mournful time for them. It can really prepare them for people with terminal illness and people with chronic illness that medical treatments can no longer maintain. It can show a sense of compassion, comfort, and safety and prepare them for the end of life. Starting with a history of hospice, the Irish Sisters of Charity founded the first home taking care of patients who were dying. However, this wasn't like our typical modern-day hospice we know about now. This was more religious-based, based on basic care needs. This was in 1897. It wasn't until a little later Cicely Saunders founded the first hospice in 1967, St. Christopher's. Cicely Saunders started out as a nurse in 1940s and moved on to be a social worker shortly after. She did have some back issues, and she did want to still be a nurse, so she ended up volunteering to be a nurse for the terminally ill. When she was volunteering to be a nurse for the terminally ill, she saw there was very many opportunities to make advancements in the treatment of chronic pain and pain in the death and dying patients, because they deserve to be comfortable and respected and prepared for end of life. And pain-free planning with family involved, she thought would be a benefit. After talking with some of her colleagues, and from a suggestion from one of her colleagues, she ended up going back to medical school to be able to practice at the full capacity and establish what she wanted her vision to be of end-of-life care that was respectful, compassionate, and honorable. After she graduated medical school, she ended up fundraising enough money to open St. Christopher's, and that was again in 1967. Shortly after, she went over to the United States to really see if anybody shared her same mindset. During one of her talks in the United States, Florence Wald was in attendance. She ended up being the first American to open a hospice in 1974. Her values were very in line with Cicely's, and she really saw Cicely Saunders as an inspiration to introduce this to America for a different transition of death and dying. During this time, death and dying was very taboo. It wasn't so much of a vulnerable thing, and it was really important for Cicely to make these improvements and make these moves, and she had the connection. She worked at Yale University as a professor to be able to find connections to help her along the way to form a better opinion of the end-of-life care in America. Shortly after, Congress passed a Medicare hospice benefit. This was optional for some states, so it wasn't quite available for everyone to have the dignified end-of-life care that they deserve, but it was definitely a step in the right direction. This was in 1986. On this side, I have facts about America's perception of hospice and most people's reality when it comes to end-of-life care, just as a result of the medical advancements. It's kind of a blessing and a curse to have what we do now, because starting around 1860, we had aseptic technique and anesthesiology, and from there we progressed to temporary dialysis and defibrillators, and we focused on more treatment of illness rather than prevention of illness, because for the longest time we had infectious diseases being the biggest part of our death count, our mortality rate. Once we started making these advancements in medicine, which are beautiful and they cascaded beautifully, we started seeing the shift to more preventable illness and treatable illness. And we're at this point today that we can have so many treatments that may prolong somebody's life with a chronic illness. However, it doesn't mean that quality of life is there. So my first topic is that more than 1/3 of patients who they spend their the last days in their ICU, and they're in pain. And a lot of this can be due to misinformation or miscommunication or lack of planning care goals, and they aren't comfortable and they're not with their loved ones. Like I said previously, we did go from a mindset of pandemic and epidemic, and the life expectancy used to be only 50 years old before we had these advancements, before we found antibiotics, before we found vaccinations, before we developed dialysis and heart transplants and organ transplants, and the list goes on and on of the medical advancements. But with that being said, the mindset was that death was inevitable, death happened, and it was not in control. Once we started getting to the point of medical advancements to prolong life that may be chronic, the mind shift switched to, I'm in control of death. Doctors are in control of death. I will control when I want to die. And that's kind of where we're at, where patients do die. The 1/3 of the patients die in the intensive care unit because they feel that they are in control of death. But again, quantity is not always better than quality. Because of this mindset, we are seeing more man-made, so to speak, or preventable illness. So hypertension, diabetes, all of the diseases we've learned about that can be prevented, and CHF, any of those that can be prevented, they are more guilt-driven. So it's not so much anymore of the flu may get you. Right now it is COVID might get you, and that is something that you can't control, and that might be better accepted. But something that is man-made and something that you could have done to prevent, and now you are chronically suffering, holds a lot of guilt. So these decisions of end of life and hospice care can get a little harder for people these days, and especially Americans, because that goes against all of our core principles to be the best, to be the greatest, to live forever and to be young forever. To die feels like, to some people, the hardest reality to accept, although it is inevitable. So there is my overview of hospice, end-of-life care, and the treatment going into it. I feel like I chose this project because I learned so much during it, and I know that I could keep going on and on about the history and the representation, but right now I'm a new nurse, and I have a hard time sometimes initiating the plan of care and the goals of care for patients, but just seeing these statistics of how many people die in the hospital and uncomfortably, as opposed to people who die at home with their family and with dignity and grace, and their family is checked up on afterwards with hospice, is incredible. And I really feel that it helped me be able to have some conversations with families regarding end-of-life care and with patients and regarding end-of-life care and what they want, because that is important, and that's an important part of history, an important part of the future, because death will never go away. Death is inevitable. So why not die in the most peaceful and respectable way around family? Thank you.